Welcome back everyone. Let's continue with our port scanner. So what we did by now is we simply just created this function which allows us to scan the ports, and we also saw how we can use for loop in order to iterate over a certain amount of ports and scan each and every one of them. But right now let's see how we can implement a function that will allow the user of this program to specify the domain name as well as the IP address if they like. Well, here is where our IPY library comes in help. So you will notice that this is still gray. That means that we haven't used it inside of our code, and that will change now. So we'll simply just create a function up here which will be called, let's say, check_IP, and this function will take one parameter which we will specify inside of these brackets, and that parameter will be the IP address. Okay. Now, before we code any of this function, we need to specify all the way down what we are going to provide to this function. And by that I mean which parameter are we going to send. Well, logically, in our case, we're going to send the IP address parameter. Keep in mind that this IP address variable doesn't have to store the IP address, it can also store the domain name. So what we need to do is we need to simply just, after the user specifies the target, we'll simply just call the function check_IP, and we will paste the IP address inside of that function. Then we're going to store all of this inside of a converted _IP. And you will see in just a second why we are doing this. So right here we're going to scan the converted IP address and the port number. Okay, so let's code the function above. So obviously we need to use this library right here, and this actual library comes with a specific function which is simply called IP function. Okay, so if I go to my Google Chrome and I have a page opened right here which is basically the documentation of the IPY library, we can see that they use right here this IP function in order to convert an IP address to the IP format. So in order for our function to work, we need to specify inside of the brackets the IP address, which is the parameter of our function. If it manages to convert the IP address, that means that this worked successfully and that the user actually specified the actual IP address to the target. If it gets a value error, that means that the user specified the domain name. So let's write that right here, and in case you don't understand, we are going to test this, so don't worry. We're going to try to convert the IP address, and if it manages, we're going to return simply what we sent to the function, which is the IP. And in case it doesn't work, we are going to get the value error, which means that the user most likely specified the domain name. And therefore we're going to return a function which belongs to the socket library, which allows us to convert the actual host name to the IP address. So all we need to do is specify that function and call it upon our IP address, and we can do that by simply specifying return socket.getHostByName. And here we specify the host name, or in our case the IP, which we pasted to our function. Okay, so this is our entire function. Now let's see inside of a terminal, and let's open up our Python 3, and here we can import IP. Oops, let me just do it like this. First of all, I will enlarge this so we can see it better. Open Python 3, import, or from IPY, import IP. And now let's say we have a variable called IP address, and it will be 192.168.1.1. Okay, and now if I simply just call converted IP equals IP from IP address, and I print the converted IP, you will see it will still be the same IP address. So it really didn't change anything. Therefore, right here, if it manages to do that, we're simply just returning the IP address that we pasted inside of this function. And we are not making any changes to it. But that is only the case if this user specifies the IP address. if the user specifies the domain name, so let's create a variable called domain name equals, and then let's say google.com, and we try the same thing, so converted IP equals IP from the domain name. And you will see we will get an error, and it will be the value error. So that is the case right here. Then we are going to perform the get host by name, which will retrieve the IP address of the google.com, and then we will return the IP address inside of our scan port function. So that is all there is for this function. Now let's see whether this works. Okay, so let's run the program, Python 3, and then port scanner. Enter target to scan. Let's say we enter, let's say the same website as before. Let's not change it right now. And instead of the IP address, we now enter the domain name. We're going to leave this to run. And here we can see that it worked successfully, as it did manage to find the port 80 open. We will get the same result even if we scanned with an IP address. So right now we can specify both the domain name and IP address. So that is good. Now in the next video we're going to take a look at how we can specify multiple targets and scan multiple targets at once. So we don't have to run our program over and over again. We can do the same thing just by specifying multiple targets inside of our program. And it will scan them one by one. So we're going to take a look at that in the next tutorial. Hope you enjoyed this small lecture, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!